Well, the NHL world is officially on Christmas break. On today's episode of Locked On Stars, we will talk about the Dallas Stars season up to this point, talk about the team as a whole, some of the best performers, and then we'll wrap up the show with a little fun segment comparing some Stars players to some comic book characters. All of this coming up on a midweek edition of Locked On Stars.
Your Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, and you are locked on the Dallas Stars on this Wednesday, December 22nd. And like I said, to open the show, the NHL world is officially on pause as of right now, officially on Christmas break. Games presumably will pick back up on December 27th. We'll see if that ends up being the case. I, for one, really hope it does. Hopefully, COVID is able to slow down and get a little bit less of a grip on the NHL world over these days as players are able to rest and spend time with their family and their friends. But, we still have some things to talk about here at Locked On Stars. Finally, kind of with the stoppage, get a moment to talk about what we've seen from the Stars team as a whole this season. But before we get into all that good stuff, I do want to take a moment and say thank you for stopping by today's episode of Locked On Stars. Whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, thank you for making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the Locked On Stars podcast wherever you get your podcast at. It's 100% free, and I always appreciate you guys' follows, likes, retweets, subscriptions, whatever it might be. But without any further hesitation, let's get right into the first talking point of today, which is just reviewing the Stars team as a whole. And as I think about the current state of this Dallas Stars team in 2021, 2022, I can't help but notice a few similarities between this team and the team from the 2019-2020 season, which we all know that Dallas Stars team went on to compete in the Stanley Cup final against the Tampa Bay Lightning, where they ultimately fell short in 6 games. But that was still one heck of a run, one heck of a team. But, even though they made it to the final stage of the NHL season, that season with everything else that, all the obstacles, if you will, that were in their way that season, things were not necessarily the most optimistic from the get-go. The Stars, as of right now in 2021-2022, sit at 15-12-2, 6th in the Central Division, but a pretty tight race between the 2nd and 6th spot in that division. And even, Dallas just beat the top team in that division at Minnesota, or the Minnesota Wild, that is, who have 40 points in first. So the race between 6 and 1 in that division seems really tight right now, which is really, really exciting. The Central Division is living up to all the expectations that I know I had for it, and I know several other people had for it this season as well, as one of, if not the most competitive division in the National Hockey League this season. But like I said, not everything has been glitz and glamour for the Stars in this 2021-2022 season, similar to the 2019-2020 season. If you remember back then, the Stars had an abysmal start to that season, losing the first of their several games on their schedule. After a lot of optimism surrounding the team going into that season, they, of course, had that early playoff exit in the 2019 playoffs at the hands of St. Louis, where they went to 7 games, and Ben Bishop gave one of the greatest playoff performances from a goalie that we've ever seen, not just in Stars history, but perhaps in NHL history. And it's a shame that team got cut short in the 2019 playoffs. But I think that a lot of the NHL world thought that the Stars were going to reload and bounce back very quickly. But that was not the case. They got off to a terrible start. I believe like 1-7-1 was their record, something similar to that to start the year. And I mean, not quite as bad this time around, but the Stars, as we all know, started this season off in a pretty poor way. They won their first game of the season in overtime against the Rangers, which that is now looking like a very, very solid win because of how good this New York Rangers team is. But after that, things were pretty shaky. They lost some games to some teams that they really shouldn't have. They lost to the Ottawa Senators twice, both times in pretty bad fashion, games that weren't necessarily close. They lost to teams like the Columbus Blue Jackets that they probably should have beaten. They've had some close go-arounds with the Arizona Coyotes, who are at the bottom of the NHL in team points. And so, not the best start for the Stars this season, but similar to the Stars team of this season. In 2019, the Stars did go on a 7-game win streak in November. This win streak started about a week later than the one did for this season, but still a 7-game win streak, then followed by consecutive losses. Dallas lost four games in a row after their 7-game win streak in 2019, as opposed to this season where they lost 5 in a row after their 7-game win streak came to an end. And also, there was a COVID stoppage in the 2019-2020 season. I know Saad Youssef of The Athletic, friend of the show, tweeted out, that the Stars, two of the biggest turning points in that season for them was a huge win against the Minnesota Wild and a COVID stoppage, which they got both of those things on Monday night, defeating the Minnesota Wild at home 7-4, while also halfway through that game, the league announcing the stoppage of play from now until December 27th due to COVID-19. And so not necessarily saying that that's going to bring great fortune for the Stars this season, but I do think that is kind of funny, kind of coincidental. And, a lot of negativity surrounding that Stars team early in the season back in 2019, a lot of negativity surrounding the Stars early on this season. As of now, I mean, at this moment in time, seems that the fan base, it feels, somewhat comforted going into this extended break with a big win over a division rival, a division-leading division rival in the Minnesota Wild. And so, again, I don't think that 5-game losing streak was indicative of who the Stars really are this season. I think that the true Dallas Stars of this 2021-2022 season could be found in the 7-game win streak period and the team that we saw on Monday against the Wild. I think that's really who the Dallas Stars are this season at their best. And obviously, they're not going to be playing their best every night because no team is perfect. No players are perfect. But, the Stars team has done really, really well against some of the top competition in the league, which I think is so fascinating. I talked about how they lost several games to inferior competition like not Montreal. They haven't played Montreal yet. Ottawa, Columbus. I would argue maybe even Boston. Boston not having quite the season that many thought they might have this year. And just struggling against some of the inferior competition in the league. Yet when they play some of the bigger names in the NHL, they play some of their best hockey. Though we saw them beat the Carolina Hurricanes, we saw them beat the Edmonton Oilers, the Colorado Avalanche. They did beat the St. Louis Blues once, even though they've gone on to lose their last 2 against that team. They beat Minnesota, they beat Calgary. On the road, nonetheless, they beat the Calgary Flames, the Pittsburgh Penguins. And so I think that that's something that can make the Stars team very, very dangerous if they're able to get things figured out and if they're able to make the postseason. I think that will bode well for them. The veteran leadership on this team, as I've mentioned several times, is something that will play a huge factor down the stretch of the regular season and hopefully in the postseason for the Stars team, because as we all know, the playoffs in any sports league are entirely different than the regular season. And having veteran guys on your team is certainly a helpful advantage. And kind of touching on that, it's crazy to see just overall a bird's eye view look of this regular season for the Dallas Stars, seeing kind of the new generation being ushered in to this team and kind of seeing some of the guys of the older days, if you will, kind of take a back seat, still finding ways to be active on this team and be efficient. But, Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn led the way with points back in 2019. Miro Heiskanen was third in the on the team in points. Alexander Radulov fourth. But now 2021, you have guys like Robo, at the second spot, leading the team in points at the second spot. Rupe at 3, Miro at 4. And of course, Joe Pavelski, as of right now, the leader of the Stars in points, which is so crazy. But I mean, I guess you can call him the new generation of the Dallas Stars since he's still a relatively new member of this team, but, not quite new in terms of age. But, we're seeing kind of the transformation, the changing of the guard, if you will. Even guys like John Klingberg, Esa Lindell, guys who have been fixtures of this team for a long time. Like I said, still finding ways to produce, not irrelevant on this team, but kind of taking a back seat to guys like Miro Heiskanen, and not necessarily taking a backseat to Yani Hockenpaw, but Yani Hockenpaw finding a way to be relevant on this team and continuing to provide great minutes whenever he's on the ice. So really excited to see how this Stars team will pick things back up after this Christmas break, because this season, has been a roller coaster so far. And I think we're going to continue to see that. And the Stars are going to pick right back up after Christmas with a lot of division games. So they'll see Nashville, they'll see Colorado a few times. And so Going to be really interesting to see how the Stars team comes off of a long break and how these other teams come off this long break, and if they can avoid coming out flat. Well, coming up next, we will take a minute and continue to talk about the Stars season, and I'll talk about some of the best performers for the Stars team throughout the early stages of this 2021-2022 season. But before we do that, do want to take a moment to say thank you to some of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Stars, and the first of those is Primal Origin Oils. If you or someone you care about has a beard, it needs to get primal. Maybe you're that guy who has never considered the benefits of treating your beard with product. Primal Origin Oils will stop the itch and make your beard look healthy and groomed. The products are free from harmful synthetic ingredients and with low impact on our planet. Primal Origin Oils makes balms, oils, and whipped butter that are renowned as the best feel in beard products available. All products are fair trade certified and handcrafted in the US. We know that every company claims to have the best, but Primal Origin Oils challenges you to compare their ingredients and the feel in beard to the other products you've used. We promise you will see and feel the difference. Remember, the code Locked On gets you 20% off at primaloriginoils.com. Again, use the code Locked On at checkout for 20% off at primaloriginoils.com. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is also brought to you by Built Bar. It's the holiday season, so grab the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, or even better than a candy bar. Built Bar is filled with so much holiday goodness, rich with decadent flavor, and covered in chocolate, but amazingly low in calories, sugar, net carbs, and fat, and high in protein. You get the best of both worlds, delicious and healthy. Built Bar gives you that extra fuel that you need to bust down those mall doors and battle all of those holiday shoppers. Or if you're just standing in endless shopping lines, Built Bar can give you that extra something to keep you going. So throw one in your jacket or your purse because you never know when you might need it. Do you like some of those marshmallow-filled treats around the holidays? Well, you need to get your hands on Built Bar Puffs. They're light, fluffy, and marshmallowy through and through. Different flavors, all covered in chocolate. Taste so good, you won't believe that they're filled with protein. You can go to built.com right now and use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Again, you can get 15% off your order by using the promo code LOCKED15 at built.com. Moving on to the next segment of today's episode of Locked On Stars, your first listen of the day. Want to take a moment and hand out some, superlatives, if you will. Talk about some of the best respective players on this Stars team as far as scoring, playmaking, things like that. I don't want to give away too much. Kind of four guys that I want to highlight as being impactful on this Stars team throughout the early stages of the season between the start and now here at the Christmas break. Starting with the best scorer on the team. And this could have been several guys, especially on this top line for the Dallas Stars, the Minutemen. But I had to go with Joe Pavelski, the ageless wonder, as many have been calling him. He's just such an absolute threat for this Dallas Stars team, especially in the slot down by the crease, by the front of the net. The guy, whether he's deflecting shots from other guys on the team or he's creating his own shots in front of the net. Just an absolute delight to watch with the puck in his possession. Joe Pavelski just continues to find ways to be amazing, to be very impressive as a hockey player, as a scorer. And, you know, as we mentioned in the last segment, he currently leads this Dallas Stars team in points. One of the best offensive threats on this team, complemented very well by Jason Robertson and Rupe Hintz, who could have easily been in this position as well, been in this category, if you will, as the best scorer on the team. And I would definitely understand any argument that people had as to why one of those two guys should actually be in this spot. But I think Joe Pavelski is a guy that is just such a game changer for this Dallas Stars team. Such an effective playmaker. And even if he's not scoring, he's normally creating a rebound that someone else on that line with him is going to take advantage of and get a nice goal from. So just a really, really good scorer all around. Really, really nice offensive threat. And again, another one of those guys that if Dallas makes the postseason is going to pay huge dividends and be an excellent leader and just excellent veteran presence on the ice. A guy that has been in the playoffs many, many times, been deep in the playoffs many, many times. So an extreme value to this Dallas Stars team. The guy I'm most excited to talk about, the best playmaker on the team, Michael Raffel. You guys probably saw on Twitter a few nights ago during the Stars Wild game that I tweeted out from the Locked On Stars account. By the way, go follow the @Locked On Stars Twitter account if you do not do so already. That Michael Raffel was easily the best playmaker on this team, on a team filled with quite a few good playmakers, guys that can pass the puck really well, set up their teammates really well, facilitate really well. But I think Michael Raffel takes the case as the best in that regard. And, a very underrated guy on this team, a guy that, I think a lot of people were just kind of meh on coming into this season. He was an offseason acquisition signed in free agency. I don't think too many people were, through the roof to get him, but I don't think too many people were disappointed in the signing. But man, he proven to be a valuable asset to this team. His steals that lead to outlet passes or assists have been so fun to watch. We saw that against this Wild team. He and Miro Heiskanen teamed up for a goal late in the game to kind of solidify the Stars lead. I believe it was the 6th goal of the game. And I know Michael Raffel was involved on both of Rupe Hentz's shorthanded goals against St. Louis back at the start of the 7-game win streak. And so just incredibly fun to watch. He's such a smart player, doesn't make too many mistakes. I mean, he's not a perfect player. There are a few times where he maybe makes a turnover or commits, a sloppy pass that leads to an opportunity for the opposition. But overall, a really, really good guy to have on the ice. Really smart veteran guy on the team, really good hockey IQ, and just knows where to be on the ice and knows his role on this team. And I'm never going to get tired of talking about how good he is. Always going to love to hype up my man, Michael Raffel. The next category I want to talk about, the next superlative, I guess, if you will, the most surprising player for this Dallas Stars team, which again, it could have been several guys, but I got to go with the big 7-0 in the goal, Braden Holtby. I was a little bit worried about him coming into the season, another guy that was an offseason acquisition for the Dallas Stars. I know myself and many others were a little bit confused by the signing of Holtby. Just because, of Anton Hudobin on the roster, Ben Bishop on the roster, Jake Ottinger, who had a nice rookie season last year in the 2020-2021 season. So it seemed kind of weird. Not only were they bringing in a 4th goalie, but they were bringing in a guy who had a pretty subpar season in Vancouver the year before. But with all that said, despite the odds, he has solidified himself on this team and is one of the last men standing in what was a crowded goalie room. Bishop obviously retired last week. Anton Hudobin now at the AHL level with the Texas Stars. And now Braden Holtby is pretty much the number 1 goalie on this Dallas Stars roster. Jake Ottinger a nice number 2, but Braden Holtby has had himself a pretty nice season, not quite to the level where he was when he was winning the Vezina Trophy or the Stanley Cup with the Washington Capitals, but still a 2.44 goals against average, 403 saves, a .922 save percentage. Definitely nothing to scoff at. Not quite Vezina numbers, like I said, for Braden Holtby, but still a very, very good season for him so far. Been a very, very good, solid goalie, consistent goalie for the Stars team, complementing one of the better defenses in the National Hockey League. And like I said, against all odds, fought hard in training camp and preseason, and now found himself as the number 1 guy on this Dallas Stars roster. And I think that the team trusts him, Coach Bowness trusts him, and I think that goes a long way for his confidence, which will hopefully continue to grow as this season goes on. And the last little superlative I want to give out, last guy I want to talk about, is the most underrated player on the Stars roster so far this season. And I think that guy for me has to be Alexander Radulov. 12 points this season, 11 assists, 1 goal. Not the most talked about guy, but he's top 5 on the team in time on ice, which is just really impressive given his age. A guy that's been in the league for a long time, a pretty physical guy, so his body has racked up quite a bit of mileage, quite a bit of damage and fatigue, I'm sure. But he's always playing hard, always helping the team out. Not always going to show up big in the stat sheet, in the score sheet, but a guy that knows how to make really good plays, a passion guy, some of the most emotion that you'll see from any guy on this Dallas Stars roster, and just an absolute joy to watch. And some of his assists this season have been absolute beauties. He's had some nice setups from behind the goal. Just a fun guy to watch play. Like I said, not always going to be the center of attention at this point in his career, especially given some of the other guys on this Stars roster. But nonetheless, Alexander Radulov still having a nice, quiet season. An underrated guy on this team for sure. And I always love seeing Rads get involved with this Stars team. Well, coming up next to close out today's episode of Locked On Stars, going to have a little bit of fun and talk about colliding the Dallas Stars with one of the most relevant movies of the year, and currently at this moment in time, Spider-Man No Way Home, with no spoilers. But before we do all that, I want to take a moment and say thank you to one of the other sponsors of today's episode, and that is BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this holiday season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. As football season continues to march towards the playoffs and college bowl season, BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code Locked On to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all of your favorite sports. So don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available. BetOnline, where the game starts. And to close out today's episode of Locked On Stars, wanted to do a little bit of a fun segment and mix in the Dallas Stars with probably the biggest item in pop culture right now, which is one of the biggest movies of the year, which is Spider-Man No Way Home. Don't worry, don't plan on spoiling this movie outside of things that have already been in the trailers. So if you still haven't seen it and you've been avoiding trailers, you might want to dip away. But I'm going to be talking about some people in the movie that were in the trailers, so that it was pretty common knowledge that they were going to be there. But I want to explore the villains in this Spider-Man No Way Home movie and compare them to some guys on this Dallas Stars roster. Thought that might be a fun way to close out today's episode. And let's just get right to it. We had 5 villains that show back up in Spider-Man No Way Home. You have Sandman, the Lizard, Electro, Dr. Octopus or Doc Ock, and of course the Green Goblin. Starting with Sandman, I think a good comparison to Sandman on the Dallas Stars team is defenseman John Klingberg, a guy that's never quite at the center of attention, and I think that could be said about Sandman in his original movie and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, and maybe clearly, when you look at this cast of villains in the Spider-Man No Way Home, probably not the guy that people are the most excited to see, but still, a guy that's there nonetheless, and a great father. And I think that goes hand in hand with some videos that were going viral, if you will, I guess, on social media the other night of John Klingberg up against the glass at warmups, having a good time with his kids, which we see that from several Stars players, but it's fresh on my mind after scrolling social media after Monday night's game. John Klingberg seems to be a great father, and again, never the center of attention, but nonetheless, a guy that's relevant on the Stars team, packs a little bit of a punch, just like Sandman does. Moving on to the Lizard, another guy that is overlooked, but an absolute threat just in his size and strength. And the Lizard comparison that I have for this Dallas Stars team is Yani Hockenpaw, another defenseman. Like I said, another guy that's overlooked, not necessarily the first guy people are going to point out when they talk about Spider-Man villains, and Yani Hockenpaw, certainly not the first guy that's going to be brought up when you talk about the Dallas Stars, but both the Lizard and Hockenpaw are absolute units, absolute massive human beings / reptiles, big, very physical presence, big physical physique. And they might not always be the best at what they do, but they're going to knock you around and they're going to hit you hard whenever they do what they do. Moving on to the third villain on the list, Electro. Obviously, we don't have quite anyone on this team that I've seen with the charisma of the great Jamie Foxx, but I think a great comparison as far as the character of Electro and a Dallas Stars player is another defenseman, Miro Heiskanen, a guy that maybe isn't overlooked in terms of the Dallas Stars, but maybe overlooked by the world. And you think about Jamie Foxx's character in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 when Electro first makes his appearance. A guy that's overlooked by the world, not appreciated for who he is, even though, he has some talent that some smarts that he provides to the world. But he eventually sets out to show the world who he really is and put the world on notice. And I think that encapsulates Electro really well. And I think that's kind of where Miro Heiskanen is in his career right now, where, the Dallas Stars faithful love and adore Miro Heiskanen, but maybe he's a little bit overlooked by the rest of the hockey world. And so he's out to put the world on notice. Well, coming in to fill the fourth spot is Dr. Octavius, Doc Ock, filled by another defenseman on this Dallas Stars team in Ryan Suter. An older guy, Dr. Octavius, kind of one of the older villains, if you will, in terms of age, but still out to prove that he is a threat. And I think that encapsulates, Ryan Suter up to this point in his career. An older guy that many maybe think is on the downfall, but still a threat, still been a valuable asset to the Stars team this season. And certainly, I think just a good comparison for Dr. Octopus, Ryan Suter. And to close out with one of the most iconic supervillains of all time and one of the most iconic Spider-Man supervillains in the Green Goblin. And I think a good comparison to that is the Captain, Jamie Benn. And I think a good big reason for that is just the mood changes we can see with Jamie. In 1 minute, he can just be doing his own thing, smiling, playing a normal game. And then he can be dropping the gloves, ready to fight someone at a moment's notice, just perfectly in tune with the mood changes that we see with Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin. And Jamie Benn, the leader of the team. And you could say, Green Goblin is the leader of Spider-Man villains. Like I said, probably the most iconic Spider-Man villain, one of the biggest names in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and just the Marvel Universe in general is the Green Goblin in terms of being a threat and being a villain. And of course, Jamie Benn, not quite the threat that he once was offensively, but still the leader of this team and a guy, that his moods can just change and fluctuate at a moment's notice, similar to the Green Goblin that we all know and love from the comics and the movies. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Now go make your second listen of the day, the Locked On Bets podcast, your daily one-stop shop for all of your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q, with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. Be sure to subscribe and follow the Locked On Stars podcast wherever you get your podcasts at, whether that's on YouTube or your favorite podcasting platform. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Dane_Lewis. That's at DANE 2_LEWIS. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Stars. Be sure to tune into tomorrow's episode as we will continue to give you a little bit more Dallas Stars insight and analysis, talking about the season up to this point as we enjoy kind of this break from hockey and kind of enjoy this Christmas week, Christmas break. So you won't want to miss out. See you back here tomorrow, Stars fans. Hope you have a great day.